assure you that what you will observe is a vast wasteland.
To try and channel it.
You will see a progression of
deny what they think is false, argue what they think is false. You have to have free and uncorrupted communication.
We've come together to examine how we can join our efforts to make the nuclear disarmament movement more successful and save our beautiful planet. A precipice is defined as a high vertical or steep rock face or a very dangerous state. Looking down from this precipice, there is a deep chasm, a situation of unending awfulness, a situation in which much of life on Earth could be destroyed. We are confronted today by a two-tier structure of nuclear haves and have-nots, by the possibilities of accidents and miscalculations, and by the dangers of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of extremist groups, as if those who now possess them were not sufficiently extremist. Yet despite current nuclear dangers, most of humanity remains both ignorant and apathetic. In our symposium, we seek to confront ignorance not only with information, but hopefully also with wisdom, and to confront apathy with a clarion call to engagement and action. When General Lee Butler received the Foundation's Distinguished Peace Leadership Award in 1999, he said, "We cannot at once keep sacred the miracle of existence and hold sacrosanct the capacity to destroy it. It is time to reassert the primacy of individual conscience, the voice of reason, and the rightful interests of humanity." This coming from a four-star general who had been the head of the United States Strategic Command. This is what brings us together and motivates our individual and collective work. In opening the symposium, I'd like to share with you greetings from the mayor of Hiroshima, Tadatoshi Akiba, a tireless campaigner for the elimination of nuclear weapons. So the mayor of Hiroshima writes, "I have to begin by thanking you for inviting this message. Then I have to lament not being there to deliver it myself. Looking at the list of great topics and great speakers, I worry that you will totally eliminate nuclear weapons without me. If only I didn't have a city to run." Actually, I have nothing new to say about nuclear weapons that won't be said better by the people to whom I am sending this message, but perhaps I can contribute a sense of the magnitude and urgency that we feel in Hiroshima. The title of your symposium, At the Nuclear Precipice, this is a good attention-getting title, and I sincerely hope that you are sharing the emotion that this phrase triggers in Hiroshima. Collectively, we human beings accept the existence of nuclear weapons because we cannot imagine them. Our understanding of the term nuclear weapon is pathetically, mercifully, and dangerously superficial. As I have said many times, the human family will, in the next few years, decide what to do about nuclear weapons. Will we eliminate them Will we allow every nation capable of making one to have them? Or will we try to make sure the good guys have them and the bad guys don't? These are our three alternatives, and two of them will lead to pain, suffering, and horror beyond our comprehension. I am sure that you are aware of the fact that even as you gather in California, dark shadows of death and destruction are creeping toward you. During the next 2 days, you will be discussing, in effect, how to turn this planet away from violence and cutthroat competition toward nonviolence and cooperation. It is hard to imagine a more vital and urgent task. I'm sure most of you already know the term crisis in Japanese includes the Chinese character for danger and opportunity. In this sense, you stand at the heart of the most pressing crisis of your time. Nuclear weapons represent danger that defies description, but they also represent the best opportunity we have to shift the international community away from the deadly competitive culture of war toward the prosperous, nonviolent, and cooperative culture of peace. You begin with smiles, hugs, coffee, and donuts. Everybody can take a moment for a hug if you want to begin that way. But as you start working, he says, I hope you will keep in mind the awesome responsibility you carry. I know that you are all determined to carry out that responsibility. But if we are to succeed, we must do more than we have been doing. We must do something other than what we have been doing, and I suspect the answer has something to do with broader and deeper cooperation among those who perceive the problem. I look forward to acting on the ideas and strategies you generate. You are the ones we have been waiting for. I fervently hope that you will point us toward the intensive, cooperative activities by which we will work together to awaken the global public to the terrible danger and wonderful opportunity before us. I will end this message now. You have a planet to save, and we are counting on you. Thank you all so much for being there. So with that message, I think we can feel the presence of the people of Hiroshima with us and urging us on to success in this most critical mission of our time. I want to introduce now our first speaker on tonight's program, Richard Falk, one of the world's leading scholars in the area of international relations and international law, a distinguished visiting scholar at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and the chair of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. Richard.
Thank you, David. It is a great challenge and privilege to be part of this program tonight. And I feel the deepest challenge in a certain way is to get meaningfully beyond pious rhetoric about this issue. And the only way that I know how to do that is to trust our moral and political imagination. And so I want to begin by talking a little bit about a imaginative scenario that goes back a ways in history. If in World War II, Germany had developed nuclear weapons first and used their 2 bombs against the cities, let's say, of Manchester and Liverpool in Great Britain, but then had gone on to lose the war, 2 very different consequences for the nuclear age would have resulted. First of all, I think it would have been highly unlikely, having witnessed the horror of nuclear devastation, that the United States would have ever used the weapons against Japan. It would have been almost unimaginable to think that, having seen what these weapons do to human beings, that they would be used in a situation such as existed at the end of World War II. And secondly, if they had not been used, as I think likely, the threat and use and possession of nuclear weapons would have been criminalized at Nuremberg, and we would have entered the nuclear age with a sense that these are such unacceptable ways of conducting conflict, of defending national interest, that we would have had a very different kind of meeting tonight. So it's important to understand, from the perspective of international law, that one of its greatest weaknesses is that the winners in major wars define the zone of prohibition and the zone of criminality. And that deep irony, that had Germany been the one to have succeeded with their weapons program, we probably would have been in a much more favorable situation at the present time. I just say that because one needs to understand that international law is subject to this very powerful distortion that is supplied by the outcome of historical struggles. And that the winners in a war like World War II, which was in every sense in the deepest sense, a just war because it defeated fascism and destroyed the Nazi system and Japanese imperialism, still had this paradoxical consequence of leaving this nuclear weapons legacy. And for the rest of the world, Hiroshima is almost as much an expression of horror at the capacity of humans to do terrible things to other humans, as is Auschwitz. But the difference is Auschwitz was perpetuated by the losers and Hiroshima by the winners. And we should ponder that, I think, in contemplating the significance of international law. The greatest, in my view, the greatest mind game of our period is the degree to which the nuclear weapon states have convinced most of the world that the danger of these weapons arises from the countries that don't possess them rather than from the countries that do. In a way, it's an incredible act of intellectual sleight of hand to have shifted the burden of adjustment away from those countries that have relied on these weapons, in one case used them, and continue to insist that they have the right to retain them. It's, as I say, it's an extraordinary mind game that most of us, including most of the people in the peace movement, have accepted and have settled for saying, well, let's slow down the nuclear arms race, or let's stabilize at a lower level the arsenal of nuclear weapons, but let's worry mostly about proliferation. I think that's a completely futile and sterile approach to the issue before us of both preventing the use of these weapons and of creating a safer and fairer world. And it is from this mind game that we have the further development that the most powerful pretext for aggressive war resides in the claim to prevent new states from acquiring these weapons. If you think about the rationale for the Iraq War, or the build-up of tensions in relation to Iran, it is all predicated on the notion that these nuclear weapon states, led by our own country, have some kind of mandate to wage aggressive war in order to prevent the acquisition of these weapons. And as we know in the case of Iraq, it was a fictitious scenario to begin with, that there were no weapons of mass destruction and no real prospect of a nuclear weapons capability. But what was done was to create a sense that it was permissible to wage a war in defiance of international law, in defiance of the United Nations, because our country, a nuclear weapon superpower, had the mission of preventing another country hostile to our own national interests from acquiring these weapons. And not only does this provide a pretext for war, but it also hides the real motivations of war. We all know by now, or should know, that oil, control of the Middle East, the security of Israel, a whole bunch of other things were the real motivations for this war. And yet, beneath the banner of counter-proliferation and anti-terrorism, aggressive war, which was viewed at Nuremberg as the greatest crime, and for which Germans and in Tokyo Japanese were executed for having engaged in. This crime of aggressive war has been waged to keep other countries from acquiring the weapons that we continue to possess and develop. Further, I think that the Nonproliferation Treaty, to the extent that it represents the embodiment of international law in this area, has been materially breached by the nuclear weapon states. And any country that wishes to could, without even relying on the withdrawal provision, regard it as void. The nuclear weapons states have been obliged not to engage in arms control, but to commit themselves to nuclear disarmament and then to general and complete disarmament, in exchange for foregoing their own weapons option. That was a fundamental premise affirmed unanimously by the International Court of Justice, including by the U.S. judge on the court. That is one difficulty. The second difficulty is the extremely discriminatory manner in which this treaty has been interpreted and applied. Germany and Japan have a complete nuclear fuel cycle, and Iran is being threatened with war because it's trying to acquire what other countries have possessed without any friction at all. Again, a pretext for aggressive war. Hiding beneath this supposed treaty that is protecting the world against the nuclear menace. Let me conclude with three very brief points. First, Bush's policies, the policies of the Bush presidency are only worse by a matter of degree to those of its predecessor. Every American president since 1945 has essentially bought into this nuclearist worldview. Secondly, it is time that we have the courage either to view the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty as void or to insist on its revival on the basis of non-discrimination and mutuality. And third, and finally, that we accept the guidelines of international law with regard to waging war. There persists the crackpot wisdom that a powerful country is better off if it has the discretion to use force without the discipline of international law. But if you look back at our history, we would never have bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We would never have engaged in the Vietnam War. We would never have invaded Iraq if we had accepted the discipline of international law. And we would be a better, prouder, and more powerful country if we had done that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Our next speaker is Thomas Graham, Ambassador Thomas Graham, a career United States member or diplomat who served as special representative to the President for arms control, nonproliferation, and disarmament in the period 1994 to 1997. He was the chief U.S. diplomat at the 1995 Nonproliferation Treaty Review and Extension Conference, and he is currently the chairman of the board of the Cyprus Fund for Peace and Security. Ambassador Graham.
Thank you, David. I'm very happy to be here at this conference. And Richard, I was very intrigued by your scenario. We are at the beginning of this conference to discuss this very important subject of nuclear weapons and how to effect their reduction and eventual elimination. So, since tonight and tomorrow we'll be hearing many theories and arguments, many good theories and arguments. Perhaps it's best to begin with scenarios. So, Richard, in a sense, I'm going to follow your example. Nuclear weapons are very dangerous things. They've always been very dangerous, but they are especially dangerous in today's world of failing states, failed states, and a war on terror. The scenario I'm about to read to you was written by a student of mine last fall. I don't say that anything like this necessarily will ever happen, but I thought it might be useful for our efforts to read it to you, to help begin this important discussion. It is 10 a.m. on October 15th, 2008, and a deadly shockwave has just reduced the heart of Manhattan to ruins. Members of Al-Qaeda have just detonated a 15-kiloton bomb, killing roughly 100,000 people. Within seconds, speculation of a nuclear attack on New York City spreads across the internet, and within minutes is verified by television cameras going live to the ominous mushroom cloud above the city. All major U.S. and international financial markets immediately suspend trading. However, these emergency measures can do nothing to prevent the global economic collapse that will follow. 30 minutes after the attack, the President addresses the nation through a live broadcast on board Air Force One. The speech is short and unequivocal in its terms. The United States has been the victim of the most horrific attack in the history of mankind, and will use any and all means necessary to bring the terrorists and those who harbor them to justice. Within days, federal law enforcement, the Department of Energy, and various other unnamed government agencies pieced together a picture of the scenario they believe unfolded. Members of Al-Qaeda seeking refuge from U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan had fled to eastern Iran sometime in late October of 2001, exploiting the relatively porous borders and already frequent arms shipments coming into Iran from Russia. The group was able to steal and smuggle back an unknown amount of highly enriched uranium from Russian storage facilities. The highly enriched uranium was then transported via ship to a country in Central America and then smuggled through the U.S.-Mexico border. The highly enriched uranium was delivered to an Al-Qaeda cell in New York, made up of 3 men, one of them a graduate-level physics student who had been recruited specifically for a nuclear attack. The bomb was of a relatively primitive gun barrel design and was assembled in a garage the group had been leasing. Plastic explosives were made on site, and the steel tube had been ordered from a local machine shop. On the morning of the attack, the men had rented a commercial moving truck and loaded the device in the back. In the middle of late morning rush hour, they detonated the bomb. It is believed they avoided detection by local and federal law enforcement through strict adherence to methods outlined in the Al-Qaeda training manual. Exactly 1 week after the attack, the President makes a decision that will forever change the course of humanity. He orders nuclear strikes on Tehran and other select Iranian cities under the justification that the Iranian government provided sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. Upon hearing that millions of innocent Muslims have been killed by the United States It only takes hours for hardline Islamic extremists to gain popular support and overthrow moderate leadership in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and most alarmingly, Pakistan. With control over Pakistan, al-Qaeda leadership has gained access to roughly 50 nuclear weapons and their possible delivery via the Gowri missile system with an effective range of 1,100 kilometers. Lastly, it is unknown if additional stolen Russian highly enriched uranium for future nuclear attacks had already been smuggled into the United States. 12 days after the initial attack on New York, Osama bin Laden meets to congratulate his lieutenants on the complete collapse of international law and the beginning of an East versus West holy war that will threaten mankind's very existence. Paul Nitze was a great American statesman. In 1950, when he was chief of policy planning at the State Department, he authored a very famous report. And in it, he said, given the circumstances of today, the United States must build as many nuclear weapons as it can. In 1999, 49 years later, he wrote in the last op-ed piece he ever wrote, entitled, "A Danger Mostly to Ourselves," that nuclear weapons are essentially just too dangerous to have around. They add nothing to our security, and the United States should work to eliminate nuclear weapons. Senator Nunn, Sam Nunn, in December 2004, wrote in the Financial Journal that the current U.S. policy of reliance on the failing early warning network in Russia and our failure to get rid of all that material and those excess weapons in Russia through government programs that are possible if we just fund them, risks, quote, an Armageddon of our own making, close quote. Bill Perry, the former Secretary of Defense, has said that, in his view, there is greater than a 50% chance of a nuclear weapon being used in anger on the territory of the United States within this decade. As Richard has outlined, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty is in trouble. It's based on a central bargain of most of the world agreeing not to have nuclear weapons and the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states agreeing to share peaceful nuclear technology and to engage in disarmament negotiations aimed at the ultimate abolition of nuclear weapons. But the nuclear weapon states have never truly lived up to their side of this bargain, particularly the United States. And now the other side of the bargain is starting to come apart. North Korea, Brazil with its new industrial enrichment plant, and the statement by its president during his election a couple of years ago, in which he said, what Brazil needs is respect, and the only way a country gets respect in this world is to have nuclear weapons. And Iran, and of course, I think all of you know what the principal issues there are. Iran is apparently pursuing a nuclear weapons option under the guise of developing a peaceful, full nuclear fuel cycle. It may, and given all this and much else, it may simply be too late to revive the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and all the associated agreements that go with it. Perhaps, as Paul Nitze suggested, 7 years ago, we should find a way to move directly toward the elimination of nuclear weapons. This would entail great leadership from the President of the United States. Perhaps he could begin this by making an address to the General Assembly of the United States, of the United Nations, that the United States would support this and ask the Security Council to take jurisdiction. You ask how the United States could ever do this? How is this possible? Well, nobody thought the Soviet Union would ever end, and it did. Nobody thought Reagan's zero option on missiles in Europe would ever happen, but it did. The impossible can happen if people work hard to make it happen. And we must try, because nuclear weapons in today's world are just too dangerous. They threaten our own security as well as everyone else's security, and we must try. We must do our best to move toward elimination because the hour is late.
Tom, thank you. That was a chilling scenario and sobering assessment of where we are. Our next speaker, Daniel Ellsberg, is a lecturer, writer, security analyst. He looks at the dangers of the nuclear era. He's widely known for having released the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War, and he continues to encourage whistleblowing by government officials. He's a recipient of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Distinguished Peace Leadership Award and currently is working as a foundation fellow on a book on nuclear dangers. Daniel Ellsberg.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking forward very much to this couple of days here because I've already found myself extremely stimulated by the earlier two speakers already. My friend Dick Falk, who's always been my single mentor on international law, said a number of things that I find extremely interesting and some which I'm going to argue with him about later. I don't think we'll have a chance tonight. But I'm also provoked or interested in the title tonight. At first glance, it sounds very right, Nuclear Precipice. Actually, if we ask ourselves, what is the nature of this precipice? Why is this a precipice, and how new is it in the sense of a precipice? The first thing that occurs to me is, although I am in fact cannot be described as optimistic about the world situation or the nuclear situation at this moment, except in the sense that has always been true for me, that I believe we have a chance. That's my optimism. And I've always thought that. And yet there have been times when I really thought that we were at a precipice that was much more serious even than we're facing now. And we didn't fall over. The worst didn't happen. That's a basis for optimism, in my view anyway, in my own thoughts. Specifically, in 1958 and 1961, when I worked at the Rand Corporation, I worked there after that, but for those years, I was led to believe by top secret estimates, which no one of my colleagues challenged, that the Soviet Union was on a crash program to develop the capability to wipe out the United States as a rival and as a society, and that the most important thing in the world was to try to avert that by deterring it, by trying to eliminate institutionally, organizationally, physically, their capability to destroy our ability to retaliate to a Soviet first strike. And so for 3 years, I lived on that precipice. I didn't bother, by the way, I and one other young analyst, Alan Enthoven, did not bother to sign up for TIAA-CREF, for the retirement program, because we thought literally there was not a chance in the world that we would live to that. That was a very practical judgment. I never got around to signing up, so I'm without retirement income at this point. So I'm happy to be a fellow here. But we lived with that. Now that, in retrospect, was as illusory a problem as the problem of deterring an Iraqi attack, not only by nuclear weapons in '91, but chemical or biological. I must say, I was willing to believe in 2002 that the confidence with which Rumsfeld and Cheney and the president asserted that we not only knew they had WMDs, not nuclears, but chemical and biological weapons, which they had clearly had before, and that they still had them, and we not only knew that they had them, but we knew where they were. That was Rumsfeld. When Powell showed all these pictures and everything, I must say that I did not assume that they were just totally wrong. I assumed that they did still have some weapons, perhaps not as many as the administration says. And that, to me, defined a precipice, because we were clearly moving inexorably toward invading a country that had chemical weapons, probably not deliverable biological weapons, but chemical weapons, which they had 10 years before. And we were going to head into that. They would surely use them. That seemed to me, I still wouldn't question that if he had them. And how are we going to respond? Bill Arkin revealed that there was a group picking nuclear targets for that contingency under Rumsfeld at that time. We would respond with nuclear weapons. There might be attacks on Israel. Israel would respond with nuclear weapons. I must say I felt that the risk of that was very significantly high, that the US or Israel would use nuclear weapons, and that was just 3 years ago. That's a precipice. First use on people since Nagasaki. As illusory as the missile gap. In 1961, by the way, at a time when we had hundreds of warheads within range of Russia on missiles and thousands on bombers, Russia at that time had 4 ICBMs. And they had 192 bombers, very obsolete, but not totally without capability, at a time when we had thousands of bombers within range. That's what I mean when I say the threat of a Soviet first strike was an illusion, top secret illusion, just as the threat of WMDs turns out to have been a total illusion. So my fear that, so when I ask why the worst didn't happen in those occasions, it was not because I was led, again, by top secret estimates. I didn't have the classified estimates, but the president did. And I think he did believe, actually, and nevertheless went ahead. That was the president we had, and not the first, who was willing to take a risk of an escalation that would lead to the use of nuclear weapons. But the risk wasn't real, it turned out. We didn't fall off that precipice. There have, however, been other cases that were not illusory at all. The Cuban Missile Crisis, turns out, we'll just mention in passing, and I lived through that. I slept in the Pentagon for that last week, the second week of the open week of the crisis, and it turns out that that was far more dangerous than I knew at the time, or than any of us knew. The President or McNamara did not know, in fact believed otherwise, that the Soviets in fact had many tactical nuclear weapons and warheads on Cuba at that time. The best guess that the CIA was making at that time was that they did not. And second, what nobody even imagined, that Khrushchev had actually delegated responsibility for using tactical nuclear weapons in response to a US invasion, which was on a particular Saturday, 48 hours away. 24 hours away when Khrushchev dismantled the weapons. That was a precipice, which could have destroyed, given the nature of the plans that we had at that time, the number of cities which we would have burned at that point with our nuclear plants of that time could have caused nuclear winter and ended life, most life or all life in the northern hemisphere and possibly in the world. Hardly anyone understood the degree of that precipice at that point, but the scale of it. But most people did understand, even better than the people in the Pentagon often, that it was an extremely dangerous situation. Well, again, we didn't fall off that one. At this point, we are not facing, I would say, the thing that I think I did have reason to fear later in the 60s when both sides were building up forces of an escalation which would lead to an all-out use by the US and Soviet Union that would destroy most life in the Northern Hemisphere and possibly in the world. That capability is inexcusably, outrageously, still in existence, still on alert, and could still be triggered by a false alarm of a kind that has frequently happened in the past, though it hasn't led to the full explosion. That's, as I say, inexcusable and outrageous. And there is, under this administration, and really under earlier ones, no slight move toward changing that situation. And as I say, no rationale for it, for the alert status, no rationale for this possibility being there. However, the probability of that happening, even in a major crisis, is unquestionably very, very much lower than in the past 30 or 40 years before that. That's been true for the last 10 years, since the end of the Cold War. So that is way down. The other nuclear dangers, which I think some of which are quite imminent and terrible, aren't that bad as that. They're unlikely to trigger an all-out exchange of a kind that really was quite possible during most of the wars. I want to make the point that whereas in some cases there was essentially a monopoly of force on one side, so the illusion of the fear of an all-out explosion was not based on reality. There were many other periods when it was very much based on reality and where the whole thing could have blown up, and the Cuban Missile Crisis is only one example of that, and there were others. With the ending of the Cold War, that's gone way down. So how to define where we are? I would say we're actually on a point, you have to visualize it somewhere, where there are several precipices that are quite reasonably described that way, even though not one of them is as horrible and acute, as much of an imminent prospect of extinction as we did live through and accepted for many years. So putting that one aside, let's say where we are right now. I think we're heading toward an attack on Iran, which could be, and I just have a couple of minutes here, I won't go into detail on this now, but it's not mere speculation on my part that could start with or lead to the use of nuclear weapons by the US or Israel. If you want to make that at its most plausible, imagine that it doesn't start with tactical weapons against their underground sites in Iran, but does start with an attack by Israel or Iran, or US, or both, of a conventional nature, which leads to reactions by Iran against our shipping, against Israel, which leads us to decide or choose or present ourselves as taking out their capability very definitively with a demonstrative use of nuclear weapons against their underground sites. That means that nuclear war could be very close. But let's say that it doesn't happen. No nuclear weapons are used. Nevertheless, I don't have to spell out, I think, that the Iran attack we are really facing right now has a catastrophic nature diplomatically, globally, in terms of the confrontation with the Muslim world and in the Middle East, the likely responses, putting aside the nuclear for the moment. Another catastrophe at least as great as the catastrophic attack on Iraq. That we're heading right toward another one, for which, by the way, the scenario seems to be almost identical to the one 3 years ago. The same speeches, the same people, the same momentum is building up. I've come to question very much whether humanity learns from history at an end now. But but I would have thought it would last more than 3 years at this point. With an Iran attack, I'm sorry, I'm told to end now. I'm going to take one more minute anyway. The Iran attack could be, would lead, I think, to essentially a police state in this country. That is a precipice we're facing right now. And if not the Iran attack, if 9/11 too came even earlier, that would lead to a police state. The police state would not improve our chances of moving away from nuclear weapons. One thing it would lead to right away, I think, is the resumption of nuclear testing, with all that would mean for proliferation in the world. So the avoidance of tyranny, so these are all connected with the prospects of nuclear weapons. I would say right now, finally, we're not exactly at a crossroads on nuclear weapons. That metaphor would be quite misleading. We're on a road. The crossroads was at various points in the past. We were at crossroads. When we discovered there were no Soviet nuclear weapons, we could have taken quite a turn at that point, which we didn't. When we discovered, when the Cold War ended, there was every good reason to believe, I think, that we would turn away decisively from the path we were on, but we didn't. A road was taken, and the road was taken toward the proliferation of nuclear weapons, toward the expansion of U.S. capability, the maintenance of it. We're on the road now, which is not so much leading to immediate extinction, immediate devastation, and it's not, although it's close to possible first use of nuclear weapons, it's not closer than we've been in the past. But what is different is that it's very hard to find reason for hope that we will change course, because when we look around at the possibilities in the world, the prospects that I think we had in the past for here's how we're going to do it, here's how we're going to change, do not look promising. I'll close by saying I agree very much with my friend Tadatoshi Akiba, who was quoted here, particularly when he says at Hiroshima, I met him in Hiroshima and elsewhere. In fact, I think I last saw him in a march against Iraq here in Manhattan. But when he says, it is not enough to do more of what we've been doing. It is not enough to do the same things we've doing. We have to find new things of doing, ways of doing it. When he says, you are the ones we are waiting for, there is no group of people that I am more honored to be with. Literally, there couldn't be another group of people that I'm more honored to be with at a table than sitting up here and many of the people in the audience. But each of us knows if it depends on us, then the basis for hope is very thin. Because we have been working at it for a long time, and it hasn't been enough. If he'd said you were among the people we depend on, fine. But it's got to be more than that. And we've got to find new ways of doing it. I happen to think that massive whistleblowing of a kind that has never happened. I had great dreams that Gorbachev would lead to a nuclear glasnost that would really alert the public to what it means to be a nuclear power in the world. We missed that chance. So I'm personally hoping very much that one thing that will catch attention is for somebody to do something which only Mordecai Vanunu, out of 9 nuclear weapon states, only one man in the world has done, and that is to risk his clearance, his freedom, his life, by telling everything he knows about the dangers and the nature of the nuclear program of his own country. One man has done that. He spent 18 years in prison for it. He's on trial right now for talking about it. And we need more of that. And I think with that, possibly the human species will wake up and get off the suicidal path it is now on. Thank you.
As you can see, among our participants, there's a spectrum between hope and pessimism that we hope to bridge in such a way that we actually can be at least part of those we've been waiting for. And I think those we've been waiting for include do include not just those on the stage, but the broader group of participants and all of you who have come out tonight to listen, to consider, and hopefully to act upon the seriousness of the issues that we're addressing. Our next speaker, Douglas Roche, is a former Canadian diplomat and senator from Canada. He has served as the Canadian ambassador for disarmament and chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee. He's currently, and for the past number of years, been serving as the chair of the Middle Powers Initiative, a coalition of 8 international non-governmental organizations that works with middle power governments to pursue a nuclear disarmament agenda. He is a recipient of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award, among many other awards, and he is an officer of the Order of Canada. Senator Douglas Roche.
Thank you, David, and ladies and gentlemen, I just told Mairead Maguire that, David, you saved the best for the last, when she'll come to follow me, so I'll be brief in my remarks. Now, the title of this conference is Nuclear Weapons and the Abandonment of International Law, and it is my belief that international humanitarian law must be built on a morality that is commonly understood. And therefore, I think that religions must advance a common ethic that will be the basis of the law we want to have to outlaw nuclear weapons. Now, the insistence of the nuclear weapon states in maintaining nuclear weapons for warfighting purposes is a violation of God's law against murder. It is time for religious leaders of all the major faiths to make this point clearly and unite in their opposition to any state holding on to nuclear weapons, any state. A united moral stance has become all the more necessary in the light of the recent report by the reformist Iranian Internet Daily that for the first time, extremist clerics in Iran have issued a new fatwa which states that Sharia does not forbid the use of nuclear weapons. Some ultra-conservative clerics are reported to be arguing that when the entire world is armed with nuclear weapons, it is then permissible to use these weapons as a countermeasure. Now, hitherto, religious leadership in the Islamic Republic of Iran has regarded the use of nuclear weapons as opposed to Sharia. Islam teaches peace at the heart of its doctrine. So do Judaism and Christianity. In fact, the Reverend Samuel Kobia, General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, speaking at the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre this week, excoriated the spread of nuclear weapons technology as an outrage against all humanity. He focused on the core of the problem. He said, "The recent reports of countries acquiring nuclear weapons technology is frightening, but it is equally a scandal that countries which possess vast arsenals of nuclear weapons are unwilling to renounce their use." I think that religious teaching about peace and nonviolence does seem to be sublimated in the present tumultuous world. Extremists in all religions seem all too willing to justify violence. Thus, as states seek justification for their nuclear weapons, religions must refocus their message. In 1983, the World Council of Churches, a fellowship of 342 denominations from virtually all Christian traditions in more than 120 countries, rejected the doctrine of nuclear deterrence and unequivocally declared that the production and deployment, as well as the use of nuclear weapons, are a crime against humanity, and that such activities must be condemned on ethical and theological grounds. In 1999, more than 7,000 people from around the world gathered in Cape Town, South Africa, for a Parliament of the World's Religions and issued a moral call for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And they stated then, "The threat and use of nuclear weapons is incompatible with civilized norms, standards of morality, and humanitarian law, which prohibit the use of inhumane weapons and those with indiscriminate effects. We say that a peace based on terror, a peace based upon threats of inflicting annihilation and genocide upon whole populations, is a peace that is morally corrupting." In January 1st, 2006, in his World Day of Peace message, the new Pope, Benedict XVI, criticized the ideas of nuclear weapons for security as he said, completely fallacious. He said, "Peace requires that all strive for a progressive and concerted nuclear disarmament." At the Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference that was held last May, the Holy See made it clear that nuclear deterrence in the modern context cannot claim any moral legitimacy. The spokesperson, Archbishop Maguire, stated, "When the Holy See expressed its limited acceptance of nuclear deterrence during the Cold War, it was with the clearly stated condition that deterrence was only a step on the way towards progressive disarmament. The Holy See has never countenanced nuclear deterrence as a permanent measure, nor does it today when it is evident that nuclear deterrence drives the development of ever new nuclear arms, thus preventing genuine nuclear disarmament." He warned that the threat of global terrorism must not be allowed to undermine the precepts of international humanitarian law. In addition, he said, even nuclear weapons, even the so-called low-yield nuclear weapons, endanger the processes of life and can lead to extended conflict. For nuclear weapons assault life on the planet. They assault the planet itself. And in so doing, they assault the process of the continuing development of the planet. The preservation of the Nonproliferation Treaty then demands, he said, an unequivocal commitment to genuine nuclear disarmament. Now, the moral condemnation of nuclear weapons appears to be strong, but it is hardly being heard and certainly not heeded by political leaders today. The longer nuclear weapons are maintained, the more societal acceptance of them seems to grow, and moralists then appear consigned to the wilderness. The moral stance is weakened when extremist clerics use the excuse of the major powers' retention as justification for a so-called moral use. A two-class world is no more permissible than a two-class morality. Religion ought to be the first to raise its voice in a united way against the possession of nuclear weapons by any state. The conference we're opening tonight, dedicated to nuclear weapons and the abandonment of international law, I believe that if there's not a firm, universally accepted moral base to the humanitarian law that encompasses nuclear weapons, then the legal taboo against the use of nuclear weapons is bound to deteriorate, and that is what is happening now. When I speak later at this conference, I will make the point that while religion must be the foremost exponent of the moral condemnation of nuclear weapons, religion by itself cannot raise the level of public attention high enough to be effective. The moral opprobrium of nuclear weapons must be expressed in language that transcends the diverse religious traditions. Religion must work with secularists in the common cause of strengthening international law to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Our final speaker this evening is Mairead Corrigan Maguire from Northern Ireland. Mairead is the 1976 recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. She received the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Distinguished Peace Leadership Award in 1991. She is a woman of great heart, compassion, courage, conviction, and one who speaks with absolute integrity and is to be listened to very carefully. Mairead.
My dear friends, I consider it a great honour to be asked to join with this panel and to join David Krieger and the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation in speaking to you this evening on the issue of nuclear weapons and human rights. The world today is in danger, definitely. But then I'm very hopeful because the world today has also got a great human family and people are working very hard and trying to bring about real change. And I believe that's where the hope lies. The world has changed in the last 10 years enormously, and it will change in the next 10 years very, very much as well. And as Einstein once said, you know, everything has changed but our thinking. And it's our thinking, it's up there in the head that we really have to think in a completely different way. We have to think right out of the box in order to bring about real change in our world today. But I'm hopeful because many people are thinking out of the box. You know, when I went to Auschwitz concentration camp many years ago at the invitation of my friend Elie Wiesel, and I stood in Auschwitz concentration camp and I thought, how did the world remain silent while 6 million people were incinerated? Why wasn't the world out saying this has got to stop? When I stood last year in Dimona in Israel at the nuclear plant, and I watched trains go into the Dimona plant, and I listened to Israeli jets fly overhead, and I thought to myself, why isn't the world saying that this nuclear madness has got to stop? And I think what we have got to say is that nuclearism, nuclear bombs, are too dangerous to be in anybody's hands. And that includes the United States of America, the UK, Israel, any of the other ones who would like a little bomb, like Iran, like Syria, like Indonesia, like North Korea, like Belfast. Because there's something about the human person, you see, that we mimic each other. You know, if somebody has a bigger house, I'll get a bigger one. If somebody has a big bomb, I'll get a bigger bomb. And that is what's happening in the world today. And who is leading the race to get the really, really big bombs? The United States of America. And the world outside America is not fooled. We see the hypocrisy. We see the doublespeak. We see the lies. We see the manipulation and the destruction of our beautiful language by talking about peace, coming in the form of more nuclear weapons which will destroy our human family. And we are not fooled. And we are not going to stand by as a human family and allow President Bush telling us he's talking to God and God's telling him to build nuclear weapons and go to war. You know, I went to Iraq in 1999, and I stood in the Al-Murayah shelter where over 400 women and children were incinerated by 2 American smart bombs. 2 hours from Israel, where they're making smart bombs, where Israel has threatened Iraq, Iran, with a strike if it dares to make smart bombs. Where is the hypocrisy in our world today where we're not standing up and speaking the truth of what is going on? You know, we have a saying in Northern Ireland for a long time, one of our famous poets, Heaney, we've great poets in Ireland, and Heaney said, you know, whatever you say, say nothing. Whatever you say, say nothing. So polite and nice people in mixed company don't talk about religion and politics. It's not the thing to be talked about. Well, you see, what's happening around our world today is we're not talking the truth to each other or to our leaders. And we're so busy being polite with each other that our leaders are taking our world to ongoing war. The Pentagon, the White House, has assured us that we now have war on terrorism, and we have to be prepared for this. Well, look, let the people of the world stand up, and especially the women in America, and let them stand up and say, we will not continue to go to war anymore. We've had enough of it. You know, America is foolish because 15,000 of your children went to an unnecessary war and come home damaged and destroyed. 300 of your kids have come home from Iraq with brain damage and bruising. Over 2,000 of your young men and women have come back from Iraq dead in body bags, and your president hasn't got the guts even to honour them, the fact that they went out to fight that war. Over 200 young kids from UK on Tony Blair's lies went to fight a war in Iraq when we all knew they had no weapons of mass destruction. Tony Blair and Bush lied to the world, and we demand they be made accountable for taking the world to war and destroying our kids. We don't have to go down the road of mass destruction and war. America currently is not honouring its obligations under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. America is the greatest bloc to nuclear disarmament in the world today. America undermined the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the conferences that were held when others want to move to getting rid of weapons. America blocked it, as it has blocked the Kyoto Agreement, as it has blocked the Geneva Conventions, as it has insulted and denied the right of the United Nations to respect the human family. America is not our leader. It hasn't got the morality to lead the world. We are under the United Nations. You know, if we lose our soul to big money, to business, to corporate power, if we sell our soul if we sell out the values that we once held dear, that life is sacred and we should not be killing each other, if we lose our sense of morality, if we lose the value that do unto others as you would have them do to you, if we lose our way in America or in the world today, what are we going to hand up on to our children and our children's children? We need to bring back again our sense of the sacred, our sense that human life and every life, be it the life of a kid in Africa, North Korea, Iran, Belfast, Boston, every child's life is special. We are standing here making up scenarios of what might have happened and what will happen. While we are standing here, thousands of children are dying of starvation and no water to drink, and the earth is being destroyed, and we are wasting time in rhetoric. We have got to start feeding the poor. And you know what I say to myself? When I first came to America, somebody asked me to go home to Belfast and collect money to buy pencils for an American school because their school children had no pencils. When I came to America, somebody asked me to join in the food queue in downtown San Francisco to help give out a free meal to hundreds of people who had no money to buy a free meal in America. And I was horrified. The richest country in the world, over 20 million of your people live below the poverty line. What does that mean? It means you have lost all sense of value, all sense of morality, all sense of what is right and just and good that you should be doing with your money, instead of beginning to weaponize the stars. I say, leave the stars to the lovers. Do you know, America is such a great country. I love it. I've been coming here often in the last 30 years, and I love it. It has such potential. Downtown in New York, people from all the different ethnic backgrounds. There's so much that you can make work. You are great people. Do you know, it was America, Eleanor Roosevelt. Wasn't it Eleanor Roosevelt and the American activists who, after the war, decided the only way forward for the human family was human rights, international laws, and pushed the Universal Declaration for Human Rights? Wasn't it America that supported the setting up of the United Nations? Doesn't it say in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, people have a right to freedom of speech? And to Israel, who are holding one of the heroes of our day, Mordecai van Nunu, 20 years later, after telling the world that Israel had nuclear weapons and doing 18 years in an Israeli jail, Israel has the audacity to hold an innocent man year after year on what charges? No charges, but that he is not allowed to speak to foreigners, to speak to foreign press, or to leave Israel. Well, I say to the Israeli brothers and sisters whom I love, I say to the Israeli nation whom we need to solve the Middle East, I say to them, where is your morality, your sense of justice? Because the Jewish people know what suffering is, and they know what justice is. And why is Mordecai van Nunu being treated like that? He was a man who had the guts to speak truth to power and to pay the price for speaking truth to power. He must be let out, because Israel needs him and we need him. And we need Israel for one good reason. Israel started the nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Israel has a moral responsibility to call for an international conference of people who know what they're talking about and the Israeli people, and sit down and seriously begin to rid the Middle East the whole way down of not only nuclear weapons, but all weapons of mass destruction. And Israel can give hope to the world and hope to the Palestinians that a peace process can be built between Palestinian and Israeli people, and that America can start to disarm. You know, it's not hard. Once America stops building nuclear weapons, once it takes serious its obligations under the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, everybody will fall behind it. China, Russia, the UK. Why, Tony Blair might decide to save us all £60 million and not buy new ships to float his Trident submarines round the world. And he might actually take serious the message he sent us in Belfast when he said to the IRA, you must give up your weapons and decommission. Well, we have a message for Mr. Blair. Stop telling us lies and give up your A-bomb and start decommissioning the real weapons. There's nothing we can't do. And the hope today in our world is we are interconnected as a human family. We need each other. We can't do without one another. And if you have a nuclear bomb, will you tell me, please, which child are you first going to drop that nuclear weapon on? Because when you decide, I want you to remember that we're all children of God. And when you drop it on that child, you drop it on us all.
You've heard some strong and very beautiful words tonight. You've heard from some of the most outstanding leaders in the worldwide movement to rid the world of nuclear weapons. It's not just words. It's a plea. It's a call to action. And unless you respond, unless all of us respond in a way that's meaningful, in a way that demonstrates we're willing to go beyond our comfort zone, we are going to be victims, all of us, victims of this nuclear age. So it's in our self-interest, and it's in the interest of humanity that we take a stand and that we join together and that we take these ideas that are offered as we stand at this precipice and we do something with it, with these ideas, so that we don't just march blindly forward like lemmings over that precipice. We've come to that precipice blindly. We've marched, we've run, we've been in the pack, we've been conformists, and we've reached yet another precipice in this nuclear age. And there's only so many precipices that we can walk up to the edge and then come back. And one of these days, if we don't act, if we don't find a way, if we don't influence the government of the United States of America, which, as you've heard, from almost all of our speakers is not offering solutions, but is the block, is the problem to progress in the world. We'll wake up to find that our beautiful world has been perhaps damaged beyond repair. And we can't stand endlessly at this precipice without destroying what's inside of us, without destroying our souls and the beauty of ourselves as human beings. Because if we just stand idly and wait for our leaders to push us over this precipice, while we stand there, we give up the essential, important courage that's within us. And I just want to leave you with the thought that there are many of us who work very hard on these issues, and in this community we've formed an organization called the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation that tries to work daily with young people on these, with young people and with all people on these issues. And I want to speak specifically to the young people who are here tonight. This is your world ahead. This is your world we're talking about. This is your world that we're trying to do our best to leave intact for you. That's part of our responsibility that as a whole, the older generations haven't done very well at. And so if we can't give you a world that's safe from nuclear weapons, you'll have to pick up the baton and try to carry on and make that world safe. But I urge you young people, not to wait too long for that baton to be passed, but to join in now and do everything you can to help make this a world free of nuclear weapons and therefore a world safe from nuclear threat. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, this symposium will resume at Westmont College in Montecito, and I invite all of you to be there if you would like to hear more of the, I think, critically important exchange of ideas that will take place in this symposium. Thank you all very much for being here, and I hope you will join us. And I ask you now to give a large round of applause to our panelists, all of them.